Welcome to Outside Views. Today we continue our deep dive into what it would actually mean for the United Kingdom to apply for EU membership again. And this is not a rejoin. There is no automatic way back. There's only the accession process and a possible BRITURN. And as we have discussed before, this process is the same for every country that applies. And today we are covering Chapter 28, that's Consumer and Health Protection. And this chapter is crucial because it deals with the safety of consumer goods, consumer rights, and public health regulations. EU consumer protection laws ensure that people have strong rights when it comes to product safety, to fair contracts, and transparent business practices. For the UK, reintegrating into these systems would require undoing some post-Brexit regulatory changes and aligning once again with EU-wide consumer and health protection standards. So what does this chapter actually cover? The EU Consumer Protection Acquis includes legally binding rules on product safety, fraud prevention, unfair business practices, and consumer rights in various sectors. It requires member states to establish independent enforcement authorities with the power to monitor markets, investigate violations, and take corrective measures where necessary. The UK already had strong consumer protection laws before Brexit because it was part of the EU framework for decades. However, since leaving the EU, certain protections have become weaker, particularly in areas where UK regulators have diverged from EU standards or where legal frameworks have not been updated to match new EU rules. And one of the key aspects of consumer protection is market surveillance. EU law requires member states to ensure that unsafe or fraudulent products do not reach consumers. Authorities must conduct regular inspections and have the power to recall unsafe goods. Since Brexit, there have been concerns about whether UK regulators have enough resources to maintain the same level of oversight. Joining the EU again would mean fully reintegrating into the EU's market surveillance system, ensuring that dangerous products do not make their way onto store shelves. Consumer rights are another major component. EU law provides strong protections against misleading advertising, unfair contract terms, and aggressive sales tactics. It also ensures that consumers have the right to return faulty goods and receive refunds for products that do not meet legal standards. The UK has maintained most of these protections post-Brexit, but some changes have been made to diverge from EU rules in digital markets and online sales. Joining the EU again would mean aligning with updated EU consumer protection laws, particularly in the digital economy, where new regulations on online marketplaces and data transparency have been introduced. Out-of-court dispute resolution mechanisms are also covered in this chapter. The EU requires member states to have efficient consumer dispute resolution systems, including mediation and arbitration services. And these systems help consumers resolve disputes without going through costly legal proceedings. While the UK has retained some of these mechanisms, they no longer benefit from EU-wide cooperation networks. Joining the EU again would restore British consumers access to cross-border dispute resolution frameworks, making it easier to resolve issues with businesses in other EU countries. Public health protection is another major area covered in this chapter. The EU sets binding rules on issues such as food safety, pharmaceutical regulations, disease control, and medical device standards. Before Brexit, the UK was part of the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, which regulates the approval of medicines across the EU. Leaving the EU meant that the UK had to set up its own regulatory process, leading to delays in drug approvals and increased costs for pharmaceutical companies. Joining the EU again would mean reintegrating into the EMA system, ensuring that UK patients have faster access to new medicines and that UK pharmaceutical companies can more easily bring their products to market. And food safety is another crucial element. EU regulations ensure that food products meet high safety and labeling standards. Since Brexit, the UK has faced challenges in maintaining these standards, particularly in relation to import controls and supply chain disruptions. Joining the EU again would mean fully adopting the EU's food safety framework, which would improve consumer confidence and facilitate smoother trade in agricultural goods. Another key area of public health protection is disease prevention and pandemic preparedness. The EU has frameworks for coordinating responses to health crises, including early warning systems and joint procurement of medical supplies. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the UK initially struggled with access to EU-wide health initiatives, highlighting the challenges of operating outside these systems. Joining the EU again would restore the UK's participation in these collaborative efforts, ensuring better preparedness for future public health emergencies. Consumer education and awareness are also important. The EU promotes consumer information campaigns and financial literacy programs to help people make informed choices, not like the Brexit vote. Member states are expected to support initiatives that educate consumers on their rights and responsibilities. If the UK were to join again, it would need to align its consumer education programs with EU initiatives and work with consumer organizations to promote awareness of consumer rights. And this brings us to the broader picture of EU accession. Joining the EU again is not a simple return. It's an entirely new application process. And that process is governed by the so-called Copenhagen criteria. These criteria set the fundamental requirements for any country seeking EU membership. A candidate country must demonstrate stable institutions, guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and protections for minorities. It must have a functioning market economy capable of handling the competitive pressures of the EU. And it must show the ability to adopt and enforce the full body of EU law, including consumer and health protection regulations. Many people think of negotiations as two sides bargaining over terms, but EU accession is not that. It's a process of compliance. The EU does not lower its standards for new members. It's the applicant that must meet those standards. And the UK, if it ever were to apply, would not receive special treatment. It would go through the same 35-chapter process as any other applicant. And consumer and health protection is just one of these chapters. Failure to comply means failure to progress in the accession process. And this is why the process is long and rigorous. There are no shortcuts, only full compliance. And joining the EU again means fully aligning with EU consumer safety laws, restoring participation in health protection frameworks, and ensuring stronger enforcement of market surveillance. There would be no opt-outs, no exceptions, no cherry-picking, only the process. And given the UK's current political climate, achieving compliance with this chapter could be one of the most straightforward, yet politically significant steps in joining the EU again. It would require political will, regulatory reform, and a renewed commitment to protecting consumers and public health at EU standards. So thank you for watching Outside Views, and if you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments what you think about this aspect of a potential UK application. See you in the next video, and one of those is right here in the end screen.